Hi, everyone, and welcome to this Under the Sea class today. This is a very different theme than anything I've covered before. And I'm so excited because they're all on circles and they accomplish so much. And I'm just so excited for this class. So before we get started, as always, I like to start with 3 deep breaths together to help us center and de-stress a little bit. You might be a little anxious, but we're here to have fun. So first things first, in through the nose, out through the mouth. Second one in through the nose, out through the mouth, and last one in through the nose and out through the mouth. Okay. I like to just start with that because we're here to have fun today. You can always strive for perfection and do everything just as I do it, but what's most important here is to have fun, learn something new, and make notes for next time. That's what I always encourage people to do for their approach to my classes. So the structure of our class, I'm going to go over really quickly what you should have with you. Then we're going to do our practice sheet. We're going to practice holding the bag, cutting the bag, a little bit of practice piping work, and then we're going to decorate. So if you don't want to listen to the introduction or the piping practice and you want to skip straight to the decorating, that's fine. I would only recommend doing that if you are more advanced. Even if you are more advanced and this is your first time taking one of my classes, it's always helpful to hear someone else's perspective on how they approach different things because you might still learn something new, right? So yeah, if you want to skip ahead, go to the description box at the bottom and there are timestamps and you can just skip ahead to different portions of the class. So in terms of what you need here today, obviously you need to have your naked cookies. Ideally 1 to 2 for each design, and then you need to have some that have the crackle on it for these 2 cookies. Now, if you somehow forgot to do the crackle or whatever, it's fine. You can just leave them naked like this one is. That's totally fine. You need to have your icing here. My icing today is slightly less saturated, I think, than what I did for the samples, and that's totally fine because both are beautiful, and I want to show you that both are beautiful. You're going to need to have your more advanced, I think I call this the advanced piping sheet. We don't need everything on here. We're really just doing this piping sheet for those teardrops. You need to have some sort of a crackle tool. I use this fancy thing. It's actually for fondant, but anything you have with a rounded end, if you have a scribe, whatever, you need some sort of scraping tool like the thingamajiggy or just the kitchen knife. You need scissors, and you of course need a scribe. I always have I have all 3 of these. I call these my trio of scribes that I always have on hand. And you need paper towels, and I think that is it. So let's get started with the practice sheet. I'm going to put these to the side. I always have the cookie in the frame when we're decorating so that you can see the finished product as we are decorating. For this one, I'd recommend using your green colors. And the last thing before we get on to decorating, practice sheet, and all that good stuff, I do want to pause for a moment and talk about the dehydrator to my left. It is helpful to have some sort of a drying mechanism at your disposal, whether it be a dehydrator or a table fan directed at the cookies. Either one works. The dehydrator is a bit more effective and faster, but this is an advanced beginner level, so I don't expect a lot of people in the room to have dehydrators, and that's totally fine. Just have a table fan directed at the cookies. If you do have a dehydrator, set it to the lowest setting. Mine goes to 95. I generally don't like to leave cookies in for more than like 10 to 15 minutes at a time. And not for more than an hour total, because it does literally dehydrate your cookie. If you are using a dehydrator, I do try to give notes on like, put it in, take it out, but just keep a mental note, especially if you're pausing the video a lot and you're doing a lot more with your cookies, you've made a lot more, whatever, that you might need to take them out sooner. I use a dehydrator always when I decorate, but I especially use them in class because I'm only doing 1 of each cookie and I film these classes live in 1 sitting. So I need my cookies to dry a bit faster because I'm only doing 1. Chances are you're doing 2, 3, you might be doing a double batch, whatever. And so I have a dehydrator here to speed up that process. Sometimes I will leave them in the dehydrator a little bit longer than I normally would, just so that they dry enough so that I can move on in class. We are going to be jumping around in all different orders in the class today, just so that we can finish everything all in one go. That's why I have a schedule to my other side. If you are decorating a lot of cookies, like maybe a triple batch of cookies, I'd recommend doing maybe half of the designs at a time. If you do all of them, then you're going to have a really long decorating day of all these cookies sitting out in various decorating stages. But as long as you're doing one batch of cookies, maybe two, you can do them all in one sitting all together. So enough talking. Let's get to decorating stuff. We're going to start by just talking about how to hold your bag. Then we're going to cut the bag. Then we're going to do piping practice. So in terms of holding the bag, we are working with a tipless bag here. On one side is the seam and on the other side is the fold. I like to take the seam, line that up with my knuckles, line that up with the top of my hand, like so. Wrap my pointer and my thumb around the top, and you should be able to hold the bag like this. Like the rest of your fingers aren't really holding the bag. It's the top that's holding it. You do not hold it in the center. You're going to be sending pressure in two different directions. Even if you're holding it slightly from the top down, it's still going to be sending pressure in two different directions, which you do not want. Okay. So make sure it's from the top down. Then you can wrap the rest of your fingers around the bag like so, or in varying degrees, depending on the size of your hand, the size of your bag. For context, I'm 5'11", so I have large hands. But I still will hold the bag like this anyway. So in terms of the angle you want to be piping at, you're going to be piping at a 45-degree angle for piping lines, generally speaking, at a 90-degree angle when you're flooding. So if you're right-handed, you're piping from left to right. If you're left-handed, you're piping from right to left. So lefties, always keep that in mind, that you may need to adjust some of the piping to make sure you're piping from right to left to make it easier on you. Now, in terms of holding the bag, you want to, in terms of your arms holding the bag, you want to brace your arms on the edge of the table somewhere between your elbow and your wrist. Mine is about 1/3 up from my elbow to my wrist. You want to be able to rotate your arm about 145 degrees and then rotate your wrist as well. We don't have stiff wrists. We are rotating our wrists as well. So if you need help, if you need a little bit more stability, I should say, brace definitely your decorating hand on the edge of the table, but then take your other hand and take the pointer and the middle finger, either brace that on the bag, or I usually say like the fatty part of your cushion of your thumb, whatever, palm. You can also brace that other hand, and then you can have a little bit more stability as you're decorating. This is not an indicator of your skill level. This is just to have more stability on your hand. I know 2 expert professional cookiers who brace their decorating hand. That's just not how I learned. I have a very steady hand to begin with. I do not like bracing my hand, so I don't. All right, so we've talked about holding the bag. Let's talk about cutting the bag. The first thing you want to do is you want to get rid of air bubbles and any icing separation before you cut the bag. So how you get rid of air bubbles, I have a whole bunch of them here. I take the top clip off, I hold the top of the bag, and I give it a good hearty spin like so. Okay. That will get out the air bubbles. If that freaks you out too much, you can always give it love taps like this, but that's a little hard on smaller bags. And then if you have any icing separation, you want to massage that out. Icing separation is totally natural. It's when the color in the liquid separates from the powdered sugar. And that happens over a period of time. How fast it happens depends on your recipe, depends on the consistency and the environment you're working in, and the color of the icing. So darker colors separate faster, or oversaturated colors separate faster. Thinner icing separates faster. Hot, humid environments separate faster. I don't know exactly what it is about the recipe, but mine tends to start to separate around 4 to 6-ish hours. Maybe it's like 6 to 8 in colder environments, 4 to 6 in hotter environments. So just keep that in mind. If it's just a little bit of separation, you can just massage it out like this. If it's overnight, that has separated way too much, and you're going to want to actually take the icing out of the bag, put it in a bowl, and give it a good mix. That's all it needs. Is it just needs a mix in the bowl. You just can't always like reincorporate it well enough in the bag if it's gone too far. So make sure you have your piping consistency, because we're going to start with that. Today we're doing a 2 consistency outline and flood, which if you've taken any of my beginner classes, I always do a 1 consistency outline and flood. Today we're doing 2 because we need a lot more detail, fine work. And so when you're cutting the bag for a 2 consistency, the piping consistency is going to be somewhere in the range of like 4 to 5 millimeters, and the flood is going to be more like 6 to 7. For today's work, you don't need to be too concerned with getting it too big or too small. I guess if anything on the smaller end, because we're doing some degree of detail work, but like there's some flexibility is my point. So in terms of cutting the bag, brace both of your arms on the edge of the table. I like to start by squeezing from the top, kind of fluffing out the end of the bag. Don't squeeze it, but just fluff it gently. Okay, my friends, fluff it. And then you're going to want to brace everything on the end of the table. I also brace my hand on the table, and you're going to cut straight across. You can always cut bigger. I don't know where that piece of plastic went. I feel like this is a hair too small, so this is good. I always clean off the tip of my bag by just lightly sandwiching it in between a paper towel. And I'm going to show you I'm going to literally cut this another hairline. Like, oh my God, where did it go? Oh no. I can't even find that piece of plastic. It's so tiny. Um, yeah, I don't even know. I don't know where that went, but the point is, it was a hairline and it made, I wouldn't say a huge difference, but you see the difference in thickness. Now this is perfect. Okay. So again, right-handed piping from left to right, left-handed piping from right to left, piping at a 45-degree angle. Make sure you've got your arm and everything braced against the table. You want just like a millimeter of icing on the end of your bag. You want to make contact, lift, and contact. Contact, lift, contact. How much you lift your bag off the table is generally based on how long your line is. The longer the line, the higher you lift it, anywhere from 1/4 of an inch to an inch. Now, a couple of things to keep in mind. If your line is breaking, or if you're getting beads at the beginning and ends of your lines like that, I was trying to imitate, there we go, beads beginning and end. The breaking of the line happens either when you encounter an air bubble and or you have inconsistent pressure on the bag. If you're massaging your bag and prepping it well, you shouldn't have air bubbles, but those you really can't avoid. Pressure on the bag, though, you do have control over. More beginners tend to have inconsistent pressure, which is where you're going to get breaks in the lines. I just want you to have straight lines without breaks. That's most important. The beads are kind of a next level thing. If you're more advanced in this class, then you can focus on beads. A bead at the beginning means that you have too much icing on the end of your bag and you're not lifting up soon enough. And then a bead at the end of your bag means that you are taking too long to lift away. And I just exaggerated those. And you could see I got a break in my line because I had inconsistent pressure because I was talking and I was not super focused. But I would just focus on straight lines without breaks. If you do want to focus on the beads, you just want to have very little, like always clean off the tip of your bag. You want to have literally a millimeter just to make contact and immediately lift off, come back down. And as soon as you make contact, you lift away. So let's ignore these two center sections here. The what is this called? Cable knit and the teardrops. We're going to practice these other lines first. So you're really guiding your icing. I'm lifting over an inch at this point. I'm guiding my icing like I'm reading music, so my eyes are always ahead of the icing. This center one is definitely the hardest. Whoops. Key here is I've got my bag over an inch off the table. I'm applying consistent pressure. I'm applying the right amount of pressure based on the consistency of my icing and the thickness of my icing. And then go ahead and practice this last one. A. This one's my favorite. Et voila. And then let's go ahead and outline a square and a circle. So make contact at all the corners and lift. Contact, lift. And then when it comes to the circle, I think it's easier for right-handed to do clockwise and left-handed to do counterclockwise, but sometimes I do counterclockwise. I don't know. Either way, circles are hard. That's the word I was looking for. Okay. Let's go ahead and cut our flood. Again, this is going to be like in the 6 to 7 millimeter range. Oh yeah, that's perfect. So that's what it would look like if I just piped a line. It's clearly a lot thicker. Let's give this another second to dry. So with a 2 consistency outline and flood, I do like to have the outline dry first. Not always, and you'll see today we don't always let it dry, because that's kind of next level. If you don't let it dry, then it kind of can melt into each other and creates a very seamless look. But especially for more beginners, you want to let that outline dry, because think about it like a fence holding the animals in. Okay. If the fence is made out of marshmallow, it's not going to hold the animals in all that well. But if the fence is made out of wood, it's going to hold them in much better. So we want a wood fence, not a marshmallow fence, unless we intentionally want a marshmallow fence. And that's a whole other story. But for today, go ahead and flood in that square and that circle. You want your bag perpendicular, and you want your tip of your bag in the icing. You don't want to be up here. You want to be down here. I always go from the outside in. It's methodical, but I just also think it makes sense. Take your scribe, and for sharp corners, the key here, this is like next level finesse, is you like bring the icing on top of the corner, and that gets you the most seamless corners, okay? Go ahead and flood in that circle. Now, if you do kind of a messy, shoddy job flooding, look like that, take your scribe, and that's okay. Just encourage it into all of the corners. Now, this is what's more challenging about a 2 consistency outline and flood, is that once you do the outline's done. Like, you don't get to mess with it anymore. It's done. With a 1 consistency, you can kind of finesse it and work with it more. Now, I do want to show you as this starts to crust. This is just barely crusting. I could probably still mess with it at this point, but it will start to, wrinkle, which maybe I'll let that sit for another second, and I'll talk about if your icing is too thick or too thin, and then I'll show you. So today, if your icing is too thick or too thin, 9 times out of 10, I say just leave it. Make a note and work on it and do better next time. I will say that if your icing is too thin for the piping consistency, you're probably going to be pretty frustrated with some of the finer detail work that we're doing. But you don't like I said in the workbook, you want somewhere between a soft peak and a medium peak to accomplish everything we're doing today. Again, I just leave it. It is what it is. Like, if it's a little too thick, it's a little too thick. If it's a little too thin, it's a little too thin. If you need to fix it, you have to go back to the kitchen, take the icing out of the bag. If it's too thick, easy, just thin it with some ice, with some water. If it's too thin, that's where you need to have that little extra icing that I always tell you to have on the side. Add a spoonful of that. It's obviously also going to change the color if you're adding more white to it. So just keep that in mind. You do not want to add more powdered sugar, because that's going to mess with the ratio of the powdered sugar to the meringue powder. And that's just a whole problem unto itself. So I just want to demonstrate here. There we go. So it started to dry more, and it's this is past the point of being able to still mess with it. So just keep that in mind. We are going to use this practice sheet again at the end of class, or towards the end of class, for the little teardrop situation. So just keep that handy somewhere. Now we're going to start decorating. We're going to start with the turtle, the ocean, and the jellyfish. So grab your cookies. If your circles are not totally circular, that is totally fine. Some of these even look better, not totally circular. I would say like the ocean, if your cookie is a little wonky, I would use that for the ocean, the turtle, and the crab, probably. When I say wonky, like you can see this is not really a circle, and that's fine. I'm gonna save that one. Let's do the turtle. So what are we outlining first? Oh, look at that. We are outlining the turtle first anyway. So for this one, we need the teal. So go ahead and get your teal all prepped and ready. This is the piping consistency, by the way. That's too small. Hey, okay. Let's go ahead and give this an outline. And I'll show you in a minute after I do this how best to outline. So I'm really getting on the edge, but still on the top of the cookie. And when you come in and you finish the outline, you can always, use your scribe to settle that in more. So when it comes to the outline, I'll just demonstrate this for a second. You really want it on top of the edge of the cookie, not hugging the edge of the cookie, on top of the edge of the cookie, okay? On top of the edge is going to make your fence straight up and down. If you're hugging kind of the edge of it, it's going to be like the bottom of a boat. And your icing is more likely to flood over if your fence is like this as opposed to like this. So just keep that in mind. You can see here, this outline, like there's no cookie on the edge of it. If anything, though, if you're going to do anything, if you're either going to do the boat or too far in and have like a millimeter of cookie, have the millimeter of cookie, because you can still overflood without that, but just something to keep in mind. All right, ocean. We're going to go ahead and outline our ocean. Again, if you're right-handed, clockwise is probably easier. But if you're left-handed, counterclockwise might be easier. Okay. And then what's the last one? We're going to outline the jellyfish, which needs white. So go grab your white. And we're going to outline that. So we're going to flood all of these cookies first because these are the cookies that have complete floods on them and will need more time to dry before moving on to the next layer. All right, we're going to go ahead and flood the turtle. For this one, we need our teal flood and our white flood and a scribe, okay? So go ahead, prep your colors and cut them so that you have both the teal and the white cut. Okay, so we're going to start by flooding the teal. Oh, and I can already tell that the tip of my bag is a little bit smaller than I would like, but I'm not going to mess with that right now because I have wet on wet to do, and y'all know that time is of the essence with wet on wet. Woo! All right, this is requiring a lot of pressure on my bag. This is like opening a hard pickle jar kind of pressure. That's how much pressure you need for the flood. And then take your white, and we're just going to do a messy squiggle. It does not need to look nice because you're about to mess it up anyway. So hold on to your cookie if you can. And I go one way. Oh my God, keep moving my cookie. I go the other way. Sometimes I kind of spread it out like a galaxy. I don't know. But you just kind of want it to do a swirly situation. You want it to look messy. You can stab it to help it settle if you need to. If you were a little too aggressive, you might need to like move the icing back in. I was a little too aggressive. There's like a lot you can do with it though to kind of fix it. So you just want kind of a messy, swirly situation, and that's it. Okay, that can go in the dehydrator. When you pick up your cookies, pick them up like this, not like this. Um, you'll thank me later. Hold them flat. If you don't hold them flat as they start to dry, you might create cracks in the surface of your icing, which is a whole other problem unto itself. I feel like there was something else I wanted to say on the turtle. And nope. Okay. So moving on, we are going to flood I'm calling this the ocean. I don't know. It's not the best name, but so for this, we're just flooding it turtle and teal. And then we're going to add some air bubbles. One set of air bubbles is for the fish, and then the other set is just cuteness on the edge of the cookie because I think it looks cute. So yeah. Okay, just settle that quickly. Grab your white flood. I like to do the fishy first. Just imagine where the fishy is going to go. And then just add like 4 dots. And then add some dots, getting smaller in size up to the top here. Whoops, that one wasn't really a dot. You don't want to make the fishy dots too low because then everything else is going to have to be really low. So just keep that in mind. They're kind of higher up. So that one goes in the dehydrator as well. And then what's next? The jellyfish. Okay, for this one, you can't see it all that well, but there's actually a wet on wet underneath the piping on top, which is super fun, extra dimension. So for this, you're going to need the white first, and then you're going to need all of the other flood consistencies. So just get them prepped and ready. At this point, you should have white, teal, and green cut, but you probably don't have coral and purple. So go ahead and prep those bags. And get them cut. Wait, that's not. That's the piping consistency. Whoopsies. Grab the flood. Give them a little cutteroo. Now, if your icing is really thin, like too thin, if you cut the tip of your bag a little bit smaller, you'll have more control over it. On the flip side, if your icing is on the thicker side, you may want to cut your tip of your bag a little bit bigger so that it comes out faster. Just a couple of notes. All right, so let's start with our white. And we're just gonna flood this You don't really need to underflood per se, but just keep in mind to not flood too much. When you're adding a lot of extra detail with wet on wet, it's just more likely to overflood, obviously, right? Because like you're adding more icing to the situation. So you can see I'm leaving like a couple little holes, which is a nice visual for me to know that I'm not over flooding my base. Move quickly with that. And then it doesn't really matter what you start with, but I usually start with the teal. And I like to mark off the outer edges with the teal like this. And then maybe I'll do the center one. Um, where you so the outer edges are most important for sure. And then in terms of how tall you make it, you're gonna cover um you're gonna cover the top of the lines with the jellyfish body. So they don't have to be super even. But you actually do just want to make sure that they are tall enough so that you can chop the top off, if that makes sense, with the jellyfish body. You can see here, I did a great job with squiggling everything except for that center one. It's less squiggly, but this is just to have a pretty little base so that then we can add some lines on top and it just adds nice dimension to it. So that one goes in the dehydrator as well. Okay. And then next, we are going to do the bases for the crab and the mermaid. So what I would just do here is the one cookie you want to make sure looks kind of nice is the one for the sand dollar. So this is my nicest looking one. So I'm going to set that aside. And then we're going to do the base for the crab and the mermaid. So for the crab base, we have teal flood and we have white flood. So I start with the teal always. And then grab your scraping tool, this thing or a knife, whatever you have. And I just try to like cover it first before I finesse anything. Like just get all the sides covered as best you can. Then I will kind of scrape it across because that's ultimately what I want. But then take the white. You don't want too much white because you still very much like want it to be teal. But this just adds a little bit of dimension to the teal. So that is the one for the crab. That can go in the dehydrator just so it dries a little bit more. And there is a bit of an art to like enough icing, but not too much icing for this. For this one, we're doing teal and green. You'll see pretty quickly, like you can tell when there's just too much icing because it's just too blobby. You want this like relatively flat, but still with some texture. Like I don't, we're not, we're not flooding these bases for two reasons. The one like functional reason is that it's just a lot of icing, and I know a lot of people complain about too much icing. Grab your green and do the same thing you did with the white. So this way, there's less icing, and you get a bit more variety in this set with like how much icing there is. But then it also just adds dimension and texture to scrape the bottom instead of always flooding the bottom. So I like that. That can go in the dehydrator. Next up, we are going to work on the shells. So first thing we're going to do is actually, whoops, I think I just messed up my dehydrator. Hold on. Okay, so first thing we're going to outline is the shell. I call this the shell. I don't know. All right. So for this one, and you can see this didn't crackle all that well, but like the point here is you want this like rustic white base to it. So however you ended up with your crackle is fine. Go ahead and grab your purple piping consistency and cut that bag. Oh, I feel like I cut this tip a little too big. Oh well. So for this one, I just freehand this. If you would prefer to take your scribe and kind of sketch it out, that's an option. But I just go for it, for better or for worse. So I always like to start with the center one. You're not trying to cover the whole cookie here. You do want to have a good amount of that white peeking through. So I like to do each side at a time like this, like the mirror side, because I feel like it just gives me a better sense of making them symmetrical. Is that really true? I don't know. And then the bottom here is just kind of like a messy, rounded-ish triangle situation. And that's fine. All right, let's go and outline the sand dollar next. So this one you need white piping, which is so small I almost couldn't find it. Okay. So for this one, go ahead. This one has kind of, I try to give it 5 wonky points. If it doesn't have 5, that's fine. The goal here is to just intentionally give it kind of a wonky edge to it. I don't know. I guess a lot of sand dollars can be more circular, but I like this. So that was that was really because I got lost here. I got lost over here talking, which is fine. All right. For these center little cutouts, the goal here, if you have the 5 points, kind of line them up with the points. You don't want them to be too close to the center, and you don't want them to be too big. The reason for those two things, so I'm making contact, I'm lifting, and I'm making contact here, okay? And this is where it doesn't really matter if you got 5 points or not. You just need to have 5 little teardrop things. This is a little close over here. What I can do, if you did that, and I got a little too close to the center, no problem. Scrape it off and try again. The reason you don't want it too close together or too close to the center is because it's going to make adding this detail piping on top a lot harder if they're too close. Okay. Let's go ahead now and outline our starfish, which is another, oh my goodness. I'm just getting my icing everywhere right now. Because yes, so when I let my icing sit, all of my icing, my flood and my piping, I just put it on a paper towel, and yes, the flood does come out of the bag, which is what it's doing right now. Okay. Grab your coral piping consistency. This is another just say a prayer and do it moment. If you want to sketch it out, go for it, but I just go for it. So you want to have, most important thing is you want to have 5 little points. I tend to do them all kind of the same, which is this almost like a petal. Oh wait, no, sorry, I go this way. I start with the first one, and then you want them kind of pointy, but not too pointy. But really, like, just make sure it has 5 points. And if it looks like absolute mayhem, you know what? It's a part of the earth. It's a part of the ocean. You can see there, I feel like I made that a little too close in, so I kind of made the last line a little farther out, if that makes sense, instead of pulling it all the way in. It's all going to get covered with icing anyway. So let's go ahead and flood in the outer portion of the shell, because we're doing flooding in sections here. So we're doing this squiggle technique to prevent craters. This is a tight squiggle, consistent pressure the whole time. You don't want it like this. I like to do a tight squiggle for really puffy areas like this. And you do not want it to go, ideally, all the way to the edge. That's going to help with the shape and it'll help with flooding. And I tend to live on the edge of, or fly by the seat of my pants. I don't know what phrase I'm trying to look for here. And I will actually flood all three at a time and then finesse them with a scribe. But if you work a lot slower, I'd recommend probably doing one at a time, because the scribe work here is what's most important to really get a good look on each of these sections. You want to really settle them in. You want to make sure you're pulling them all the way down. If it gets too messy down here and the joining is really ugly for next level here, when you do the center two, you can fix that really easily. So just keep that in mind. All right, we're going to do the sand dollar now. So you need your white piping and your white flood. And for this one, I do like to do a little bit of a loose squiggle just to attempt to prevent craters in these smaller sections. I'm just making up words today, left and right. I don't know what's going on, but here we are. Grab your white. For cutouts, I don't know. I always like to flood the cutout first. And you really don't want to overflood here. It's definitely a delicate balance, because if you underflood, it's definitely going to crater. But if you overflood with these cutouts, they're actually going to spill into the cutouts, and then you won't have your beautiful cutouts anymore. And I actually had that happen when I was making the samples for this class. And that's the kind of thing you don't really notice until like the icing is drying. Now, the beauty here with this design, of course, is that you are going to cover up a lot of the sections that might crater anyway with the like detail work on top. So it might just be fine, y'all. Okay, pop this in the dehydrator. Oh, and if you need to, I mean, my icing settled on its own, but this is where you can like use your scribe to kind of encourage it into all the little corners and doodads. And then last but certainly not least, we are going to flood our starfish. And I do like to add some squiggles here too. Why not? You are going to cover this with a lot of detail work on top. So if it does end up cratering, it's all good. So when I'm doing the squiggles, I usually try to like flood around the edge of them first. That's why not going all the way to the edge is super helpful. Take your scribe, settle all these bits out. Et voila. All right, that one can go in the dehydrator. The shell hopefully is dry enough. You might need to pause the video for 5 minutes if it's not. What you're looking for right now is you want to be able to touch, you want to be able to touch the icing. I just stuck my finger in that accidentally. Like, I'm applying basically no pressure. I just want to be able to touch the icing and not have it come off on my finger. If your icing is still too wet, pause the video for 5 minutes and then come back. We're just gonna do the remaining sections for this flooding in sections. We can do everything else now. Okay. And for these center ones, I just like to go for it and do one big fat one. Don't go all the way to the bottom because you'll use your scribe for that. But if you don't like doing the big fat one technique, you can always do the more traditional like outline and flood each section. But when I say outline, you still want to do like flood up next to each section. That makes sense. Like do the flood pressure. So this little joining portion is going to get covered anyway with the pearl. So if you don't like the look of it, it'll get covered. And go ahead, even if this does melt into the top section a little bit, it's okay, again, because it's all going to get covered up with the line work. And my gosh, I have icing everywhere. The line work and the pearl. Okay, pop that in the dehydrator. And let's move on to take out the mermaid and the crab backgrounds. We're going to move on to the first section of the mermaid. So the key here is you want the icing to be dry to the touch. Okay. Again, if your icing is not dry to, it's like if you can't do this and not have icing come off on your hands, it's not dry enough. If you need to pop it back in the dehydrator or pause the video for 5 minutes, come back, you'll want to do that. The reason is because you don't want the like colors to melt into each other. So for this one, we're going to start by outlining. I like to have this at a little bit of an angle. You can see the green lines if you did them straight. And I just freehand piping kind of sort of a triangle with the coral. And then I take the purple and we're going to same, very similar shape to the sections of the what's that called? Starfish. One fin is smaller than the other. This always happens. My right fin tends to be bigger than my left fin. I don't know. It's fine. And then we're going to go ahead and we're going to flood this portion of the mermaid. I do like to add a little bit of a squiggle. And then you're going to need your coral flood and your purple flood and your scribe. So it is a good plan here to like make sure you're not adding too much flood. You'll thank me later. Move quickly, grab your purple flood, add some lines to it, about 1/8 of an inch apart. Grab your scribe and your paper towel. And for this one, we're only pulling in one direction. Clean off your scribe after every pull. Pull before the start of the purple line. Pull out like so. If you need to settle any of the pointy bits, go ahead and settle them. Et voila! We're going to wait to do these other sections to make sure everything is nicely crusted in between. So pop that in the dehydrator in front of your fan, whatever you're working with. And then I'm going to see what the situation is here. If you're working with a lot of cookies today, or just generally speaking, I would probably pull out the turtle, ocean, and am I calling that? Yeah, turtle, ocean, and jellyfish. Yeah, turtle, ocean, jellyfish, to let them dry in the air. I'm going to let them keep drying in the dehydrator so that I can make sure that they're ready when I need to work on them. Like I said, also pull out the crab. We're not going to do the crab yet, but you want to make sure that that is not sitting in the dehydrator for too long. So let's check out our sand dollar. Where is she? Where did I put her? All right, let's see. Okay, so we're going to do the detail piping on top of this, but this is another moment where you might need to pause the video and come back to it. So I want to make sure that this icing is relatively smooth to the touch before piping on top of it. If you can't run your finger over it and it's somewhat smooth, it can be a little bit tacky, but it needs to be somewhat smooth. Then your icing is not dry enough and you need to like pause the video, let it dry for another 5 to 10 minutes. This is this timing thing that's like it's really hard to do through Zoom because how much time you need to dry depends on the thickness of your icing. It depends on the environment you're working in. If it's a lot more hot and humid, it's going to take longer to dry. If it's dry and cool, it's going to take less time to dry. If you're in high altitude, it's going to take less time to dry, all that good stuff. So these are just things to keep in mind. We're going to start by piping these little, I don't know what this detail piping is called, but the key here is to just make sure that you're leaving enough space at the end to add little dots. So I'm just making contact in the center and I'm lifting and I'm coming around, lifting about 1/2 inch off the cookie. Add my little dots in the corner. If you want to be really extra, which I am not, but I'll show you, if you want to be really extra, you can take your scribe and settle each dot so they're perfectly round, but y'all, that's not me. And then you want to add one more big dot in the center. I'm just holding my bag like perpendicular and I'm squeezing until I like the size of it. And again, you can use your scribe to kind of settle it out if you want, or don't. And that, my friends, is our first completed cookie. I'm going to put that to the side. I don't think she needs any more time in the dehydrator. Yeah, I think she's fine. Let's move on to the mermaid. Go back to our mermaid. And all we need for this is we just want the tail to have crusted ever so slightly. We don't need it to do much. And we're just going to flood in the right fin, left fin, doesn't really matter which one you start with. Do that squiggle technique. I'll show you in a second. Again, if you're really struggling with the squiggle, what it is I'm talking about, go ahead and flood that fin. Is this called a fin? I don't even know. I'm just calling it a fin. Okay, put that back in the dehydrator. In terms of that squiggle for the squiggle technique, it is a tight squiggle. It's not a loose squiggle like this. You want it really tight, squeezing, almost basically touching the cookie. That's what we're going for. Let's take out our shell. Again, you want to make sure that this is dry enough before doing this detail piping. You want to be able to like, it should be somewhat smooth to the touch. If it's still super tacky, you need another 5 to 10 minutes. Take your purple piping consistency. And we're going to do a very similar thing, like motion that we did for the sand dollar. So start in the center. The key here is to just leave space on either side of this line detail so that you can see the individual sections. Because if you make it too big and you're basically running up against the edge of each section, then like what was the point of taking all that time to do each section? And then for the bottom here, just add some little squiggles on the bottom like that. Now, if you're doing this and you're so frustrated and you think this looks so ugly, something you could do is actually just flood the whole thing in, like maybe pipe it the way we did to get the shape, pipe the outline, and then flood the whole thing in. And then you can add this line detail on top of it, and it will give you a similar look, but in a way it's easier because you don't have to do all those individual sections. That's another common way to do this shell. We're going to put that in the dehydrator just so it has a chance to let that crust over before we put the pearl on top of it. Then we're going to move on to. We're going to go back to the fin here. Again, if your right fin is not, you want to be able to touch it again and not have icing come off on your finger. I'm not applying pressure. I'm just trying to touch it. That makes any sense? I hope it does. Okay. Go ahead and flood the left fin. She's gorgeous. She's gorgeous. If that goes back in the dehydrator. Then we're going to move on to brain fart. Starfish. Okay. So again, I know I'm a broken record on this, but you want to make sure, oh, this is gorgeous. This is like nice and smooth to the touch. This one you probably want to be a little bit more dry than the sand dollar or the shell, just because of the kind of detail you're adding to this. Like, not this one, but a different one I did. Maybe it is this one. I added the dots on top a little too soon, and the center of it actually kind of caved in, which is not ideal. Okay, so for this one, we're going to start with the main dots here. Okay, these main dots. And then we're going to do a different technique for the smaller dots. Okay, so for this one, you want to hold your bag perpendicular, squeeze until you like the size of the dot, and then lift. Two options. You can either just lift, you're going to have then a pretty large peak, and you will probably want to settle that with your scribe. Or another option is to kind of do a little flick. It's a flush flick. Oh my God, if that makes any sense. See if I can show this. So instead of pulling upright, I'm doing a little flick. Is it perfect? No. Is it good enough that I don't feel like I have to use a scribe to settle it out? Yes. And that is my goal. Now, if you are more of a beginner here and you're like, what are the peaks, Grace? What are you talking about? Just ignore what I'm saying and just pipe your dots and call it a day. This is just like next level finessing that is helpful. You want your dots to get progressively smaller. That is the goal here. Okay. And then, my friends, the next part is kind of fun. And this is where you want to actually take your coral flood, pipe a generous dot, take your scribe, get some of that icing on the end. You don't want too much, but like enough. And then I actually dab the cookie like this. If you've taken any of my other classes with the lemons, this is the same technique that I like to use for the lemon dot. Another like common way to give a similar, not a similar effect, but like a kind of texture that people will do for a starfish or a lemon is the bear technique, which is a whole other ball game. It requires a paintbrush. It's just very different. And it's a different texture too. If you took my Tutti Frutti class, for example, the orange is the bear technique. This I like because it adds a whole bunch of dots that are uneven. Like, I think this is the point here to me, is that because if you used piping consistency to do this, then they would all look super even. They'd be a lot bigger too. Here, whoops. And I like it when it is uneven like that. You see, like I added that extra big whoop accidentally. And there she is. We just finished another cookie. Pat yourself on the back 2,500 times. I'm so proud of us. Okay, that's our second cookie. We're going to put that one to the side. Then next, we're going to do, what's next? Starfish shell. We're going to pipe the pearl on the shell. And this is just a generous dot in the middle. Again, you can lift up or do, that wasn't quite big enough, or do the little twist at the top, whatever floats your boat. That one's done. Pat yourself on the back for finishing another one. And then pull out the mermaid tail. For this one, again, you want to make sure it is like somewhat smooth to touch. If it's not, you're going to want to pause the video and come back to it. For this one, you need the purple piping consistency and white. So we're going to start with the purple. The key here is to go pretty close to the edge of that fin. And I will do one round. I will do a second. And then I usually have enough space to also go through the center. I like the look of that. But like I said, with this right fin, I don't know what it is, but I always tend to make it smaller. And so I don't tend to have enough space to go through the center again, which is fine. If you do, go for it. If you made your first outline entirely too big and you don't have space for anything, that's also fine too. And then for the bubbles on the side, this is white piping consistency. And I'm going to do my little flick so that I don't feel like I have to, what's the word? Settle that with a scribe. And there we go. How cute is she? I mean, I'm very pleased. Okay. So next thing, I want you to take a look at your bases for your fish, your turtle, and your jellyfish. Oh, so I just want to, this almost looks like there is, what's the word? Color bleed. I can tell it's not color bleed though. I think actually what happened is that, and I can see that it kind of flooded over. Something was uneven either in how I picked up the cookie or whatever. And the white actually the white flood, or the lines actually kind of moved a little bit on top of the white flood. So like there's actually that what looks like color bleed is the icing actually is like underneath that white. If this makes any sense, God bless. Anyway, so that's just a total sidebar. These three cookies here, I want you to see, can you apply light pressure on them? And even though I had mine in the dehydrator longer than normal, these are not dry enough. In my not so humble opinion, these to me are not dry enough. You want them like you want to be able to apply, I'd say like light medium pressure without it instantly caving in. For me, this isn't dry enough. So what I'm going to do, I've taken them out of the dehydrator, absolutely take them out at this point. I am going to actually set a timer. I would say 15 minutes at least. I'm not putting them in dehydrator. I'm leaving them out. Um, I'm going to set a timer for, I would say 15 minutes, and I'm going to come back. Again, you want it to be very smooth to touch, and you want to be able to apply light pressure. We're adding a lot of stuff on top of these, and if they're not dry enough, it's going to sink in and you will cry. So we want to avoid crying. We want to make sure our cookies are dry enough. So I would pause this video, set a timer probably for 15 minutes. You could start with 10, do 10-minute increments, depending on your cookie, depending on how they're drying. If you're using a table fan, you may need upwards of like 30 minutes for these to dry enough. I really want to make sure we've got enough icing. Our icing is really dry enough so that things don't cave in on us. And the technique that we're going to use, I was going to say to prevent craters. I'm going to show you one technique. Well, I'm going to show you two techniques to prevent craters, especially with the jellyfish. And one of them actually works better the drier the icing is. So that's a bonus too. So yeah, I'm going to come back. I'm going to come back instantly. But yeah, set your timer for 10 to 15 minutes and we'll see where we're at after that. Hello, welcome back. I let my cookies dry for more like 30 to 45 minutes, and I'm actually feeling real good about that. I can apply a small amount of pressure, and it does not instantly indent the icing. Although, if I really stuck my finger in it, it absolutely would crush the icing. So that's just keep that in mind. What are we going to do next? So we're going to start with the crab and the turtle. So crab and turtle. We're going to do, doesn't matter which one first. Let's start with the crab because I think that's a little bit easier. Sort of. All right. So for this one, we need our coral blood and our coral piping consistency. And again, I'm not going to sketch this out, but if you would like to use your scribe and kind of mark it out, that's a-okay. But I'm just going to go for it. So you don't want to make your turtle too low because you're just going to have to use that much more icing and whatnot to cover the bottom. So just keep that in mind. And you want to make sure you're leaving enough room on the top for the claws, enough room on the side for the little leggies. I can't remember in the original video if I did a squiggle on this or not. Honestly, it doesn't really matter because we're going to be crackling this anyway, which I love. So just go ahead and outline and immediately flood it in. It's a small space. We don't need to worry about over flooding, really. Well, I suppose you can, but generally speaking. And then I'm going to put this in the dehydrator. I am going to set a timer right now for 10 minutes because knowing me, I would totally forget. The amount of time you need for the icing to dry enough to crackle is usually anywhere from 10 to 20 minutes. It just depends on the thickness of your icing and the environment you're in. Again, if you're in a really hot, humid environment, it's going to take more time to dry enough. If your icing is really thin, it's going to take more time, all that good stuff. So for the turtle, you need the green flood and the green piping. For this one, the turtle, it just needs to be an oval in the center. This one's on the smaller side. I made ones that were a little bit bigger. It doesn't really matter all that much. Just put it in the center and make an oval. I would start and end your oval where the head is going to be, because that seam will get covered up, if that makes sense. And if you don't really like any part of it, no problem. You can just like kind of fix it. The beauty on the bottom is that you can cover that up a little bit. again, we're not really worried about craters, but I want to show you a technique that you can use here. When I say not worried about craters, it's because we're going to crackle it anyway. But if you take your scribe and actually, poke holes underneath where you're going to flood, this is a new technique that the Goodies Goddess, I believe, is her account name that I first saw it from. I'd never heard of it before that. To help prevent craters. This is a technique that I find works better the drier the icing. Like, you can do this the next day, which is unbelievable. You can flood Wednesday and then do your second layer Thursday, which is in the world of royal icing, like, that's unreal. And you can prevent craters this way. Like, holy wow cow. So that's good enough. We're going to put that in the dehydrator. We will do that one after the crab, obviously. So my timer is set for 10 minutes. Next up, we're going to do the jellyfishy. Oops, wrong way. All right, so real talk on the jellyfish. You can see that I have a crater on the jellyfish. What I did underneath the jellyfish was that poke technique. I still got a crater, and I have a hunch. I have a guess. I have two guesses as to why I still got a crater. And I'm going to be real with you. Like, I'm a expert advanced cookier, and I still get craters. I don't entirely understand how to 100% prevent craters. Actually, I have three theories as to why I still got a crater on this one. One is that poke technique. I really feel like it works the best when your icing is drier, because if you're poking while your icing is not as dry, it could actually compromise the integrity of that base flood underneath that section. So maybe that white actually caved in. I don't know. Because I know that I was pretty impatient when I was doing the jellyfish. So that's one theory. A second theory is that my flood is pretty thin. The thinner the flood, the more likely it is to crater. And then my third theory is that my teal was pretty oversaturated as far as the color goes. And so I'm kind of wondering if maybe that affects craters as well. Like, icing that has too much food coloring tends to crater more. I don't know. I might have just made that up. I just know that when there's too much food coloring, it does compromise the integrity of the icing. So anyway, those are just my thoughts on that. All that to say, I'm going to give you all of my tips and tricks, and they may work and they may not work. And just know that, like, I don't always get it right. So anyway, all right. For the jellyfish, somewhere above center, start the head. You're going to outline with teal. Make sure you're leaving a nice little white border there. Now, you've got two choices here for how to prevent craters. You can do the poke technique, or you can do a squiggle. I'm going to do the poke because I have a theory here that the flood needs to be pretty dry for this poke technique to work. Ugh. And this flood is a lot more dry than when I made the samples. So I'm going to see if this works. Next, you're going to need the teal flood, green, white, and coral ready to rock and roll. So starting with my teal, making sure to not overflood. Get those corners. And then we're going to take the green and do a messy squiggle. It really does not matter because we're going to mess with this anyway. And by the way, I don't know if anyone noticed. Okay, wait, sorry, let me focus. I'm just doing like figure eights here. Really doesn't matter. Just mess her up. And then I like to take the coral and do some dots in the corner. I kind of start bigger on the left side and go up, and then I start bigger up on the right side and go down, if that makes any sense. And then take your white and just add a few more kind of partly overlapping, partly not dots. Oh, she done. Well, not done yet. That part's done. Sidebar. I made the jellyfish teal because jellyfish are clear, right? And the water in this set is teal. So yeah. Okay, we're gonna put that in the dehydrator. Let that crust over before we add all the squiggly bits on it. Next up, we're going to practice our little sea details, is what I'm calling them. So whatever these green things are, whatever, I guess this is coral reef, I don't know. And then whatever these teal bits are, I don't know. All, well, the teal bits and the coral is all doing focus, Grace. Okay. The teal bits are this exact shape here, this teardrop. These other two are the same concept, basically, of pressure piping and adjusting pressure as you're piping. So this is just going to help you with this concept of pressure piping. So start with these little teardrops. You're going to be piping a dot. You're going to release pressure, pull towards the paper or cookie. That was ugly. Okay, let me try this again. I can't do it that slowly. So you're piping a dot, you're releasing pressure, pulling towards the cookie and completely releasing pressure. So piping, slowly releasing pressure as you're coming down. You don't want to pipe and then suddenly release pressure and then pull down because it doesn't give you enough icing, if that makes sense. The little guys here are like a little either heart. You do one side by side or a trio. Most of them are trios. Hey, just like that. Okay. So practice a little bit on your paper, but I always say like the real practice is on the cookies and you don't want to waste that much icing on your practice sheet. So let's move on. We're going to do all the details on this. So we're going to start with the fishy. All of this is different kinds, different variations on pressure piping. So for the fishy, we're going to start by piping a nice big dot. It's essentially the same thing, but just like a much larger scale. And then same little concept with the little teardrops. And that's the fishy. Okay. I just like saying fishy. All right, grab your green. For these, it's, oops. And actually, yeah, no, never mind. Okay. It's thicker at the bottom. And then as I'm coming up, I'm releasing pressure. So this detail stuff here, if your icing is on the thicker side, you're both going to love me and hate me. Because like I said in the workbook, right, like somewhere between a soft peak and a medium peak. And that's because with this kind of detail stuff, if it's too close together and it's more like a soft peak, it might melt together. For these lines here, they can all go in the same direction. They can alternate, whatever floats your boat. Oh, there goes my timer. We'll get to those in a second. You can make it one layer. You can add a second layer. Personally, I think the second layer looks a little crowded, but depending on how you did your first layer, it might make sense. I'm just going to take the turtle and the crab out of the dehydrator so they don't spend too much time in there. It's totally fine if they keep just drying out while we finish this guy up. For the coral bits, so it's the same adjusting pressure, but you're going in the opposite direction. So you're going to start at the top really thick. And as you're pulling down, you're going to release pressure. That's really hard for me to do that slowly. That's a lot easier to do if it's a little bit faster. So I start with the main pieces, and then I come in with the teardrops to kind of add. And it's totally fine if pieces overlap, if colors overlap. I would just make sure with all of these, as you're coming towards the bottoms, try to make sure you don't have anything poking up like that, either towards the bottom or the top, because those, when they dry, will easily just flake right off. And then for the last bit, with the teal bits, I just like to kind of fill in any spots on the bottom that just feel like they need some love. I don't know. Sometimes I do 3, sometimes I do 2. Whatever just feels like it makes sense. I mean, in terms of like how many little teardrop things I do. So you can do as much or as little as you want of this extra decoration stuff. I think this is cute as is. I'm going to leave it. You can see I kind of do half with the green, half with the coral. I tend to do 3, and then I fill in the little bits at the bottom with no particular agenda per se. So we're done with another one. Pat yourself on the back. Oh. Okay. Next we're gonna tackle the Krabby Patty. Actually, I'm gonna just pull these out because you want to make sure you crackle these in due time. So start with the crab because that's what we started with. Take your crackle tool and make sure you are cracking. You should actually feel the icing crack underneath. Don't go too close to the edge because you may like poke out the edge. If that happens, no worries while it's wet. Just kind of ease it back in. If it's indenting instead of cracking, it just needs more time to dry. You really want to see a crack in the surface. Other things to talk about. So make sure you're connecting your cracks, not like this. We really want them next to each other, a continuous crackle surface, but still unique. Because if you try to crack over the same spot too many times, how many more times can I say crack? It will just kind of look like a dented blob instead of unique crackles. I love the crackle because it really catches the light, which I think is super cool. Okay, put the turtle aside. We're going to finish off our Krabby Patty. Okay, well, not finish it off. We actually have to do this in 2 stages. So what I was just thinking. All right, we're going to take your coral piping consistency. Pipe little dots for the eyes. And then I like to just pipe the start of the arms. And this is all pressure piping. So I'm holding consistent pressure. And I'm not lifting my bag. Okay. And this is the same kind of releasing pressure moment as we did with the green. I'm holding my bag perpendicular. So as you're pulling down and away on the legs, you want to release pressure. And then for the claws, I like to outline the inner part first. Just basically a moon shape. Add a little squiggle in the middle to help prevent craters. Doesn't really matter how big or the shape-ish, just as long as they're symmetrical, like just make them look the same-ish. And then take your flood. We are going to flood on top of these little guys. And then take your scribe. Kind of encourage it into all the little crevices. And I can tell I have too much icing on that second one. So I'm just going to pull some of that off. Because it's already kind of like filling in the inner part. And then we're going to pop that in the dehydrator just to let that crust a little bit before we add on the sea details, as I like to call them. And then let's take our turtle and your green piping consistency. And we're going to start with the head, which is just a massive dot. And I like to kind of encourage it towards the body a little bit. And then you can use your scribe to help it settle. And then to finish off the leggies, so again, this is just like piping, squeezing a lot, and then releasing pressure as you pull away. I usually like to do the opposite side together. And then the little legs, whoops, that's probably way too far up for the little legs. Also, this one looks a little ridiculous. You could turn this around and make sure you're piping at the exact same angle. We're going to be covering like anything on the bottom that looks terrible, you can cover with the C bits. So that's fine. Yeah, I don't know if I have any more thoughts on that. Okay. Pop that in the dehydrator. What are we doing next? Grab your jellyfish. And all you want to make sure for this, again, is that the jellyfish has just like crusted so that it's not going to melt into the little squiggles. For this one, we need all colors of piping consistency except for white. And just start by adding squiggles on top. If any of your bottom squiggles look really ugly, guess what? This is a great opportunity to cover them up. Now, I don't like to add too many squiggles on top. Because I think you still want to be able to see what's underneath. And by the way, these squiggles, so I'm actually like laying the icing on top. I'm not like touching the cookie, if that makes sense. Let me try to show you the difference. So this is me touching the cookie the whole time. And then this is me kind of guiding the icing as it goes, just like we did on the really big, the really big line on the practice sheet. It's the same concept. So, and now for this one, I might, you know what, do I want to add any more? I kind of like it like this. I think I might leave it like that. Okay, so you can see the difference here, right? Like I have one layer of extra lines. This one, there's a little bit more overlap. It's a little more busy. Whichever way you like the look of is beautiful, okay? So we just finished another cookie. I'm going to put that back in the dehydrator for a little bit longer because I feel like that top portion could use a little bit more. Okay, and then all we have left to do are what I call the C details. I am going to take both the crab and the turtle out of the dehydrator because they don't really need to be in there anymore. And then we're going to finish this off. First up, I like to do the green first. Same thing we did with this ocean one. So as you're coming up, start to release pressure and do your best to get the ends to stick. Because they will flake off very easily, especially when they're bagged up. And you can see I'm kind of leaving some space in between. Doesn't need to be too crowded. I'm covering up the bottom. If you really hate the look of your crab anywhere towards the bottom, just cover it up. Easy peasy. Next, we're going to do something different that we didn't do on the other one because the fish was purple. For this one, it's just a squiggle, like a tight squiggle, like almost like what you would do to prevent craters, but not quite as tight. And I do it just in a 3-section motion like this. I guess I'm doing 3 here, but you can do more, you can do less. I did 4, it looks like, on the other one. And then I'm going to take my my teal, and just add in the little green bits. Again, it can be singles, doubles, triples, whatever seems to make sense. And we just finished another cookie. Okay. For this last one, okay. I was like, is there a cookie missing? No. Okay. For this one, we're not going to do the green because the turtle is green. So we're going to start with the coral bits, whatever these are. And I like this first one to kind of overlap a little with the turtle. And I guess I just did 2 of these. But if you wanted to add another one in the middle, you totally could. I just didn't want to overcrowd the turtle. And then, but I really think it looks super cool when you overlap parts of it. And then take the purple. We're going to do the same little doodad that we did on the other one just now. And if you're a little lost on the squiggle, let me show you. So this is like an open zigzag. Whoops. This is what I would call what we're doing like to prevent craters. This is a little looser than that because you still want to be able to see the squiggle. And then we're going to finish this off with the teal bits. And then we're done. So again, there's not like a super method to my madness here. I mean, I guess somewhat. But just whatever kind of looks good, do it. Like you can see here, I filled in the bottom on this one, but I didn't fill in the bottom on this one, and they both look great. So that's it. We are done. Let me pull out all of our cookies so we can, well, I would not recommend moving your cookies, but I'm going to move these into place so that we can bask in all of our glory of all of these gorgeous cookies that we created together. This is the Under the Sea set. Thank you so much for joining me today. Next steps. There are more details in the workbook about like what to do with leftover icing, how to freeze your cookies, all that stuff. First things first, though, make sure you give your icing enough time to dry before you put it in an airtight container. That means 6 to 8 hours exposed to the air. So you do not want to put your cookie like on a drying rack with holes underneath it. Something flat like a cookie sheet. And yeah, let that be. The icing dries exposed to air. Do not put it in an airtight container before it's completely dry. I think that is it today. Thank you so much for joining me. Please do leave a review for the class on the website. When you leave a review with a photo, you get a coupon. Reviews without photos don't get coupons. So make sure you leave a photo. I also love it when you leave photos because it's the best way for me to see what you've done. And it always makes me so happy when I get to see all of my students' creations. So thank you again for joining me. I cannot wait to see you in the next class. Bye.